Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty major, repression. Specifically, how Freud described it in his 1915 work.
Yeah, it's one of those concepts that even if you haven't studied Freud in depth, you've probably heard the word thrown around.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like seeped into our everyday language. But what does it really mean? And why should we care?
Right. Well, on a basic level, Freud defines it as a sort of defense mechanism
Okay, defense against what, though?
against uh against these unwanted instincts or desires that our mind perceives as threatening.
So it's not just like, oh, I don't want to think about that right now.
Error.
It's deeper than that.
Way deeper. It's happening unconsciously. We're not even aware we're doing it.
So, like, in your notes, you mentioned sometimes feeling this disconnect between what you do and what you actually want. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
It could be, yeah. See, Freud used this analogy of a guest being thrown out of a drawing room.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The guest represents this unacceptable instinct. It gets kicked out of conscious awareness. But
It's still lurking right outside the door, like, hey, let me back in.
exactly, it's not gone, it's just repressed.
So this whole out of sight, out of mind thing doesn't really apply here.
Not with repression. It takes constant energy to keep those thoughts and feelings down.
Wow, our minds are working overtime. But okay, here's where I get tripped up. Why repress pleasurable instincts? Like if something feels good, why bury it?
Well, Freud argued that sometimes the pleasure might come with baggage, let's say.
Baggage meaning,
Meaning it clashes with our morals, our values, maybe even societal expectations.
so like, having a crush on someone who's totally off limits.
Perfect example. Acknowledging those feelings would create so much internal conflict.
It's easier to just repress them, even if it means sacrificing some happiness.
Exactly. We avoid the conflict, but here's the catch. That repressed energy, it doesn't just vanish.
Okay, so where does it go? This is where it gets really interesting.
Freud outlines three main possibilities. The first being total repression. The thought, the desire, it basically disappears from consciousness.
Poof, gone. Like hitting delete. But is that even realistic? Can something truly be erased from our minds?
Even Freud admitted that total repression is rare. Usually, it finds other ways to express itself.
Okay, so what are the other options? Spill the beans.
Well, the repressed energy can transform into another emotion. Say, you're repressing anger towards a coworker.
Happens to the best of us.
Instead of confronting them directly, that anger might come out as anxiety, resentment, even physical stuff like headaches.
So instead of yelling at your coworker, you snap at your partner when you get home.
Exactly. The mind disguises the true emotion into something more acceptable.
Wow, sneaky. And the third possibility.
This one's big, and it ties into a lot of what we'll be discussing. The repressed energy becomes anxiety.
Ah, yes, the classic Freudian anxiety. How does that work exactly?
Well, Freud saw anxiety as like a warning signal from the unconscious, a sign that there's something down there, unresolved, bubbling up to the surface.
So if we're feeling anxious all the time, maybe it's worth asking ourselves, what am I not dealing with?
Exactly. It's like that feeling of unease you mentioned having around your boss. Could be a sign of something deeper.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
And to really see how this plays out, Freud gets into specifics about what he called neuroses, different ways this repression manifests.
Ooh, I love getting into the nitty-gritty. Let's hear about these neuroses.
Well, we've got anxiety hysteria, conversion hysteria, obsessive compulsive neurosis, each with their own quirks, but all rooted in repression.
Right. Lead the way. I'm ready to dive in.
So first up, we've got anxiety hysteria. Freud used this example of someone with a phobia of horses. Seems kind of random, right?
Yeah, horses are pretty majestic. Not exactly the first thing that screams terrifying.
But what if that fear is actually a displacement of something else? Like, say, a repressed desire, maybe even sexual, that's considered taboo?
So instead of facing that forbidden attraction head on, the mind's like, nope, let's be scared of horses instead.
Exactly. It's safer, less anxiety-provoking. The mind's a master of redirection.
Our minds are seriously playing mental gymnastics. Okay, what about this conversion hysteria? What's that all about?
This one is wild. Conversion hysteria is where the repressed energy turns into a physical symptom.
Wait, so like actual physical ailments?
Yep. Freud talked about patients with paralysis, blindness, even seizures, but no physical cause could be found.
That's kind of terrifying, actually. So you're saying, like, someone could develop a limp because they're repressing some deep emotional trauma.
It's possible. It's like the body is trying to communicate something the mind can't process consciously.
And what's even weirder, you said some patients are indifferent to their symptoms.
Yeah, it's almost like since the conflict is kept hidden, the mind's like mission accomplished, even if the body's paying the price.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. All right, what's next on our neurosis tour?
Let's talk obsessive compulsive neurosis. This one's all about guilt and anxiety tied to morality.
Okay, so we're talking about people with like those ritualistic behaviors. The hand washing, the checking things over and over.
Exactly. Freud noticed these folks often struggled with repressed impulses, things they considered wrong or shameful.
So like aggressive urges, maybe even forbidden sexual desires, stuff that clashes with their moral code.
Yep. And to cope with those impulses, the mind creates these obsessions and compulsions.
So it's like a constant battle between the repressed desire and the need to control it. The hand washing becomes a way to cleanse themselves of the bad thoughts.
Exactly. A way to create order, to feel in control when everything inside feels chaotic.
Man, repression's a whole roller coaster ride. But hold on, you mentioned something earlier about substitutes. What did you mean by that?
Ah, yes. See, Freud didn't think repression just made things disappear. He said it created these substitutes, ways for the repressed stuff to sneak out in disguise.
So like a mental swap. Repressed thought OUT, something else AN.
Precisely. And these substitutes can be pretty sneaky. Dreams, slips of the tongue, even jokes.
Wait, so that time I called my boss mom in a meeting.
Right.
That was my repressed childhood issues coming out to play.
Maybe. Freud believed these seemingly random things could actually reveal a lot about our unconscious mind.
Okay, my mind is officially double blown. But okay, back to repression itself. You mentioned it's not a one-time event, it's dynamic. What did Freud mean by that?
It's like holding a beach ball underwater. Takes constant effort, right? If you let go, bam, it pops right back up.
So we're constantly using energy to keep those repressed thoughts submerged. No wonder adulting is exhausting.
And get this, the strength of our repression can change depending on what's going on in our lives.
So like under stress, those repressed thoughts are more likely to break free, like cracks in a dam.
Exactly. It's why sometimes we have these emotional outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. The pressure builds, the cracks widen, boom.
This is all making so much sense now. But okay, if everyone represses stuff, why do we all experience it so differently?
Well, Freud recognized that what gets repressed, how it comes out, it's all influenced by our individual experiences.
So our upbringing, our culture, all that plays a role. There's no one-size-fits-all explanation.
Nope. Freud gave us the framework, but each person's repression story is unique.
Makes sense. But okay, big question. What happens if our repression completely fails? Like, what are the consequences?
Well, that's where things can get messy. Freud believed a breakdown in repression could lead to a whole host of problems.
Like, we're talking full-blown mental breakdowns.
Not necessarily, but it could manifest as anxiety, phobias, obsessions, even physical stuff like those conversion hysteria symptoms.
So it's like our mind's way of saying, hey, pay attention, something's not right.
Exactly. It's trying to find a way to release the pressure, even if it means creating these symptoms.
Man, our minds are complicated. But, okay, if repression is so common, can we ever become aware of what we're repressing? Is that even a good thing?
That's where Freud introduced the idea of psychoanalysis, a way to kind of dig into the unconscious and see what's lurking down there.
So like therapy, having someone help us uncover those hidden parts of ourselves.
Exactly. Not about eliminating repression completely, but understanding it, working with it.
Okay, that sounds intense, but maybe also kind of liberating.
It can be both. It's a journey, and it's not for everyone. But the insights you can gain, totally worth it.
So before we went to that quick break, we were talking about how psychoanalysis could help us understand our own repression. Like, is that the key to unlocking all those hidden doors in our minds?
It can be a powerful tool, yeah. Think of it as like having a skilled guide as you navigate this really intricate maze. That's your unconscious.
Okay, I'm liking this maze analogy.
Sure.
So what's the guide the psychoanalyst actually doing?
They're helping you unearth those buried conflicts and desires that might be driving your actions, your anxieties, all that stuff.
Ah, so it's not just about figuring out what we've repressed, but also how it's messing with our lives today.
Exactly. Making those connections, seeing the patterns. It's like those aha moments when you suddenly understand why you react a certain way in a certain situation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like, how do they actually do that? What's going on in these psychoanalysis sessions?
Well, Freud developed some pretty interesting techniques. Free association is a big one.
Free association meaning just talking about whatever pops into your head.
Yeah, basically. The idea is that by letting go of that conscious control, those deeper thoughts and feelings can kind of bubble up to the surface.
Sounds scary, AD fascinating at the same time. Like, what if you blurt out something totally embarrassing?
It's a safe space, though,
Hmm.
and the analyst is trained to, pick up on those subtle clues, the things you might not even realize you're revealing.
Okay, so it's like they're reading between the lines of our ramblings.
Exactly. And then there's dream analysis, which Freud considered the royal road to the unconscious.
Ooh, dreams. Everyone loves a good dream interpretation, but like, how can you tell which dreams are just random nonsense and which ones are actually telling us something important?
Well, that's where the analyst's expertise comes in. They help you break down the symbols, the recurring themes, all that. It can get pretty deep.
I bet. So with all this digging and analyzing, what's the end goal? What does success look like in psychoanalysis?
It's not about erasing those repressed memories or desires. It's more about integrating them, understanding them, accepting them, and then hopefully, making more conscious choices about how you want to live your life.
So it's like making peace with those shadowy parts of ourselves.
Exactly. It can be a really powerful process of self-discovery and healing.
I can see that. But, I have to ask, this whole psychoanalysis thing, it sounds pretty intense, pretty long term. Is it really worth all that time and effort?
Well, like anything, it depends on the person and their needs. It's not a quick fix, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But for some people, the insights they gain, the relief they find, it can be life-changing.
I can definitely see that. But, okay, let's be real. Freud's theories, they haven't exactly been universally embraced. What are some of the criticisms people have?
Oh, yeah. There's been a lot of debate over the years. Some folks argue that his concepts, like the Oedipus complex, are tough to really prove scientifically.
Okay, so they're saying his ideas are more like interpretations than hard facts.
Yeah, kind of. And then there's the whole determinism thing. Some critics say Freud put too much emphasis on childhood experiences shaping us, like we're stuck in those patterns forever.
So not enough room for growth, for change.
Right. But to be fair to Freud, he did acknowledge that we're complex beings influenced by all sorts of things throughout our lives.
True. No one theory can capture the whole human experience. But even with those criticisms, Freud's ideas, they've had a huge impact, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
we're still talking about him over 100 years later. That's got to count for something, right?
Right. So as we wrap up our deep dive into repression, any final takeaways for our listeners out there? What should we all remember about this whole thing?
Well, first off, repression. It's normal. Don't freak out if you realize you're doing it. We all do it.
So it's not a sign of weakness. It's just human nature.
Exactly. And remember, it's a dynamic process. Those repressed thoughts and feelings, they ebb and flow, they get stronger or weaker depending on what's happening in our lives.
So like if we notice those anxieties popping up, maybe it's a clue that we need to pay attention. Do some digging.
Exactly. And lastly, if you're struggling, if those patterns are really causing problems, don't be afraid to seek help. There's no shame in it.
Right. There are people out there who can help us navigate those murky waters. So there you have it, folks. A crash course in Freudian repression. We covered a lot, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought, maybe even inspired you to do a little self-exploration of your own.
Yeah, uncovering those hidden parts of ourselves, it can be kind of scary, but it can also be incredibly liberating. It's all part of the journey, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.